We're call, we're calling this join the evolution, evolution electric vehicle plugging into electric cars. And again, my name is John Paul, and I'm from AAA Northeast. So when did it all start? Well, in the turn of the last century, many cars were electric. In fact, Henry Ford's wife actually drove an electric car because she couldn't hand start a Ford. So electric cars were very popular. In fact, in the turn of the last century, just kind of like now, if you wanted to buy a car, it could be electric, it could be gasoline, it could be diesel, it could be steam powered, it could have a variety of different propulsion systems. And just like today, you can buy a car that's gasoline, a hybrid, gasoline hybrid vehicle, a plug-in hybrid vehicle, we'll go into all of these, and a fully electric vehicle, maybe one that runs on compressed natural gas. So we're seeing some variations of a theme that you're going to have more and more choices. So again, lots of decisions, what made cars run back in the, early 1900s, late 1800s. Again, gas, steam, battery, all kinds of different things. In fact, the first kind of a sad statistic, the first pedestrian fatality took place, I think it was in New York, and it was a pedestrian got killed by an electric car. So the big three and more, so who, we all know about Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and Ferdinand Porsche. Porsche had, the market on diesel vehicles. Did Carl Benz build the first car? Well, there's a little controversy there. A lot of people say that Mercedes-Benz, Carl Benz built the first car. Some people argue that somebody by the name of Sylvester Roper, who was from Roxbury, Massachusetts, oddly enough, built the first vehicle, and it was a steam-powered sort of three-wheeler of sorts. So back in the 70s and early 80s, when we had some gas shortages, it sort of rose the interest of electric vehicles. We started seeing some electric vehicles hit the market because of gas shortages, not necessarily high prices. I don't know how many of you remember when there was a time in the 70s, you could only buy gas every other day, or you could only buy $2 worth of gas or something like that. And alternative fuels started to gain a little bit of popularity back then. And one of the first really workable electric vehicles was a vehicle by General Motors called the EV1. This was a pretty phenomenal vehicle for the time. It was relatively sporty. It was pretty fast. It was pretty good looking compared to some others. And it had pretty decent range too. I think it had a range of about 100 miles. GM leased them only. You could not buy them. There was a few that were reported that GM didn't get them back. In fact, not far from where I live, there was an EV1 that was sitting in someone's driveway for the longest time. And finally, it just disappeared. I don't know whatever happened to it, but it sat there for an awful long time. And I think they worked at a GM dealership, so maybe they never gave it back. So in the 80s and even the 90s, it was kind of the beginning of the new electric cars. From the top left, there was something called electric Leopard, not an electric Leopard, electric Leopard. It was a Renault car. It was manufactured by a company called the U.S. Electric Auto Company, located in Massachusetts. It was powered by a series of golf cart batteries. I actually owned one, not that one, but I owned one very similar to that. And it was powered by, there was 10 golf cart batteries behind the back seat. And there was another 6 under the hood, 16 in total, and one 12-volt battery to run the accessories. It would go about 60 miles an hour. It had about a 50-mile range, and it was a terrible car. It was one of the cars that gave electric vehicles a terrible reputation. It was rather poorly constructed, although I guess for 1980, it wasn't terrible, but it used a Renault the car as a base. It used the throttle, the gas pedal, if you will, was a 2-speed switch. It was kind of low and high. You still used the manual transmission, and it used a electric generator. Actually, it was a generator out of a GE aircraft engine that was bolted to the transmission. And again, it was workable, it was drivable. I used to drive it back and forth to work when I worked for the AAA office that was about 8 or 10 miles from my house. And it worked out pretty good. I could drive to work, and I could even plug it into 110 volts and charge it up while I was at work, and then drive it back home again. In the top right-hand corner, the little wedgie-shaped cars, they were either called city cars or commuter cars. The base ones were city cars. And then the company, I think, got sold, and they added a few more batteries to them. They called them commuter cars. You still do see them floating around here and there because the body was made out of fiberglass, and they're so unique looking. And you see them kind of in touristy areas once in a while. Again, a pretty terrible car. The person that I bought the Renault car electric Leopard from also had 1 or 2 of those as well. He was kind of a electrical engineer. I have driven all of them, and the city car is kind of like driving a golf cart. Not a lot going for it. The bottom left was probably the first real interesting, much more capable electric car. It was a car called the Selectria Force. It was basically a Chevy that they took all the engines out of, or Geo, depending on which age they were. And they took all the engine and drivetrain and gas tanks and all that sort of stuff out of them. And they put in their own designed electric motor. It was actually 2 students from MIT that designed the car. And they had some pretty sophisticated battery systems. The car would still had a range of maybe 60 or 80 miles, but it was easily able to get up to freeway speeds. It felt very normal driving it, and it actually had air conditioning, which made it kind of nice, and a workable sound system, radio that seemed to work well. Again, pretty workable car. Back in that time frame, AAA had worked with a group where we would provide road service and insurance to people that leased those cars, but the kind of caveat was that you had to be a multimodal commuter. So you use the electric car to drive to the subway stop. You parked it at the subway station parking garage. You were able to charge up while you were there, although you had to pay for parking. And then you took the train to work and then returned and came home the same way. That program lasted for a couple of years. People hated to give up the car because they were actually a pretty good car. Then things got a bit more sophisticated, but before they did, there was a book and a movie that came out called Who Killed the Electric Car? And it was thought that GM did that because they took all the GM EV1s away and crushed them. I remember talking to an engineer from General Motors, and he said, no, we were very much in favor of electric cars at the time, and we really wanted to try to make a case for electric cars. Just about that time, gasoline supplies got plentiful and gas prices went down. So, but the same people who people think were out to kill the electric car are now all in the electric car business. So who else is in the electric car business? Who are the electric car giants? Certainly Tesla. You see an awful lot of Teslas on the road today, and a variety of ages, from millennials to baby boomers. And they appeal to a lot of different people, some for environmental reasons, some for tax purposes, I guess, some because they're just the expensive ones, the Model S and the Model X. They're luxury American cars, and that's what some people want. GM is kind of all in on electric cars. They have the Chevrolet Bolt, which has been recently recalled for a battery issue, and they're putting a new design battery in them. They're advising if you're one of the people that own a Chevrolet Bolt, don't park it indoors because it has the potential of having a problem. But they're also coming out, they have a new Cadillac coming out called the Lyric, which is a kind of mid-size SUV, all electric, promises really, really good range, over 350 miles, good performance like all electric cars do. And Toyota is coming out with some electric cars as well. And then there's a whole series of cars from Japan, and China, and we'll see more of those electric cars here. And again, every sort of domestic manufacturer, Ford, GM, Chrysler, all have electric cars in the pipeline, as do all of the traditional Asian imports. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai and Kia even have a smattering of electric cars as well, and they have some pretty good ones now too. The Kia Niro is a pretty good car. The Kia Soul has a pretty decent range now. Nissan has the Leaf Plus, which has some pretty good range. Not as good as, say, Tesla or even the Chevrolet Bolt, but still not bad. So we're seeing more and more electric vehicles of all different kinds. One of the ones that sort of has me a little bit more interested too is a company called Lucid. And Lucid just came out with a very expensive car called the Lucid Air. And it has been EPA certified for a 500-mile range, which is pretty amazing that an electric car can go 500 miles. So what are the electric cars? What's the lingo, the electric car lingo? Well, we have hybrids, we have plug-in hybrids, sometimes referred to a PHEV. We have battery electric vehicles called BEVs. Then we have fuel cell vehicles, FEVs, FCEVs, so fuel cell electric vehicles. So we're seeing a variety of different types of vehicles. So what's a hybrid? A hybrid is a gasoline-powered car, predominantly a gasoline car. In some cases, like the older Chevrolet Volt with a V, the Volt was a car that they called an extended range electric car. The Chevrolet said it was an electric car with a gasoline engine that would run a generator, which would continue to make it run on electricity. So it 99% of the time it ran on electricity. That electricity could be stored in a battery, or it could be stored, or it could be made using electricity. Very similar to a tugboat, for instance. If you see a tugboat out in the harbor, those are generally diesel electric. So big electric motors powered by diesel engine generators. So they have that instant torque. But a conventional gasoline hybrid, it's a gasoline engine with a hybrid, so an electric motor that assists it. It will be the thing that gets you moving from a stop. And also, when you're out on the highway cruising along and you take your foot off the accelerator and accelerate lightly after that, it may be just the electric motor that runs the car, not the gasoline engine. You accelerate hard, both of them work together, and the electric motor also gives it a little bit more zip, a little bit more performance. Arguably, the most popular hybrid car right now is the Toyota Prius. Very popular car, been around for a really long time, more popular than the Honda Insight, which was technically the first modern hybrid. It can be argued that hybrids went back to the 1920s, but the Prius certainly one of the most popular and one of the most trouble-free, by the way. Plug-in hybrid. A plug-in hybrid is similar to a conventional hybrid. So there's a gasoline engine, there's an electric motor, but there's also a bigger battery. So depending on the type of hybrid, the picture there is the Honda Clarity, which I'll have to get a new picture because I think they just discontinued that. But it is a vehicle that might get 30, 40, 50, 60 miles on pure electric. And then when the battery gets diminished completely, it turns into a conventional hybrid. So it still works as a hybrid, gives you some of the benefits of a hybrid, no emissions at an idle because the electric motor gets it moving. The battery doesn't, about 80% of the battery totally discharges, and then 20% is left, and that's what makes it operate as a regular hybrid. So what's the advantage? Why do you want a plug-in hybrid? Well, if you only commute, I had a coworker, he commuted about 10 miles back and forth to work. He had a Prius Prime, so a plug-in Prius. It had a range of about 25 or 26 miles. He would drive it to work, plug it in at the charging station at work, and we have one at least one at one of our offices, and he would plug it in and drive it back home. He said he would go months without buying gasoline, and he could take it on a long drive and never have to worry about running out of electricity. So that's the advantage of a plug-in hybrid. It gives you sort of that long range need if you have it, but also gives you that short range, fully electric power. The next one, a pure battery electric vehicle like the Tesla or a Kia or many more. again, we see these battery electric vehicles. I host a little radio show on Saturday. I think next week I have somebody on the show. He owns a moving company, and he just purchased two big moving trucks, two big box trucks that run on batteries only, because a lot of the moves he does is in the cities to the suburb, and he doesn't really drive that far, maybe 50 or 60 miles, and he wants to do it with zero emissions. And he also likes the idea that when he's on city streets and he's stopped, he's not using any electricity, not polluting the air. So he's got these pretty good sized trucks that run only on batteries. So battery electric vehicles is what everyone is investing in right now. Every major manufacturer is involved, and they're very functional. I have driven a couple of Teslas. I've never fully evaluated one. I think I've evaluated pretty much every other electric vehicle. The last one I drove was a Ford Mustang Mach E. I had it for a week, used it pretty extensively. It was an all-wheel drive version with about a 225-mile range. It performed amazing. It did everything I needed to do. In fact, I said to somebody, there's no reason why this vehicle couldn't replace my gasoline car unless I was planning a very, very long trip. But if I was driving from my home to maybe vacation destination 100 miles away, not a problem. So, and then there's finally fuel cell electric vehicles. Fuel cell electric vehicles are electric motors that are powered by electricity. That electricity is made using hydrogen for fuel. The hydrogen goes through an electric fuel cell. The fuel cell makes the electricity, it powers the electric motor. There are some vehicles that run on purely hydrogen through regular internal combustion. That was a failure about 10 or 12 years ago. BMW did that. A couple of manufacturers are re-looking at that today. But I think fuel cell electrics are pretty interesting. When a fuel cell vehicle runs and the hydrogen runs through the fuel cell, it makes a little bit of water afterwards, and that's about all it does. So I have only driven two fuel cell vehicles. One was a Honda, I guess three. One was a GM product, one was a Honda, and one was a Hyundai. And they perform pretty normally. They feel pretty average. The problem is, where do you get hydrogen? There is no good way to make hydrogen. The best way to make hydrogen, or the best way we make hydrogen today, is with compressed natural gas, but it's not economic. There's not a good economic number for it. You take a lot of energy to make a fair amount of hydrogen. The best way to make hydrogen is with nuclear, but no, not everybody wants a nuclear power plant in their yard. Some people refer to it as green hydrogen. Hydrogen is made in a more environmentally friendly way. But I think hydrogen at some point will be really the fuel of the future, more than battery electric vehicles, because of the batteries themselves. So how do you charge up an electric car? Well, the plug on the far left, pretty standard 110 volt plug. If you own anything that's electric, that's pretty much what they have. That is more of a convenience option for most electric vehicles because it is very slow charging. The picture in the middle is a Bosch electric vehicle charger. It's referred to as a level 2 charger. That's what most people will probably have at home. That's what you might find at most businesses, parking garages, things like that. The next one over is the top right is an electric vehicle charging station. That is not a Tesla station. That's a conventional electric vehicle charging station. And it uses something called level 3 charging. Level 3 charging gives you a quicker, more powerful charge. And on the bottom right is the most simple electric vehicle charging station that will still give you the kind of medium charge, that level 2 charge, but it basically plugs into a dryer outlet. So if you have enough electricity at your house to run an electric dryer or an electric stove, you have an outlet for that. You plug this in, no fancy charging station, and it's a couple $100 investment. So how long does it take to charge? Level 1 charging can take 8 to 30 hours. The last time I drove a Kia Soul electric, which was a car that I really liked, It was comfortable to drive, pretty good performance. It had only had a range of about 140 miles, I think. I just about ran it out of electricity. I was down to the last 10 or 20 miles. On 110 volts, it would take 21 hours to recharge according to the onboard computer. So that meant I couldn't drive it to work the next day. I could drive it on the second day, but not the next day. But if you drive relatively short distances, 10 or 20, 30 miles, you can plug into 110 volts and recharge and everything's okay. But it is the slowest way to charge. Certainly overnight charging is recommended. And it's the standard equipment. It is kind of what we see for charging today. Level 2 charging, a little bit more sophisticated. It does require special equipment, range and price to put a charging station in your house, $500 to a couple $1,000s. Some vehicle manufacturers are actually giving you charging stations, or they're helping pay for it. You see those in a lot of public places like the AAA office that I work out of, a lot of parking garages and so forth. You can recharge typically in 3 to maybe in the longest time, 10 or 12 hours. I find that any of the electric vehicles I drive can fully recharge in about 6 hours. Then there's level 3 charging, which is this fast charging, high voltage, DC current. The other two I call them charging stations. The other two charging stations they're not really charging stations. They're just conveyances to get the electricity to the car. The actual charger is built into the car. In level 3, it's actually, the charger is the device itself, and you just plug it in and it goes directly into the batteries. This is the fastest charge you'll see. In most cases, it will recharge an electric vehicle to about 80% of its range in as little as 20 minutes. So I was talking to a person that had a Tesla. They lived in New England and they had a house in Florida. And they drove the Tesla to Florida. And I asked them how they did it. And they said, well, they planned their trip. And there's sort of like AAA has triptychs. And we have charging stations on our triptych app, but there's also something called Plug Share, which basically kind of does the same thing. Only it tells you where not every gas station is. It tells you where every charging station is. But he used the Tesla system. He made it to Florida with no problems. And his Tesla has a couple 100-mile range, 220-mile range. And I said to him, wasn't it inconvenient? And he said, well, not really. He said, I figured it out that most times I was stopping somewhere between 180 and 210 miles. And he said, that's somewhere between 3 and 4 hours worth of driving. And he said, 3 and 4 hours worth of driving, I need to get up, I need to get a drink of water, I need to stretch, I need to go use the restroom. And he said it actually forced me to take a break, where if I had a longer range, I might have tried to push myself a little bit more. So he said, even though it may have sounded inconvenient, it was actually a healthier drive because he was able to take more breaks. Pretty much all of the charging outlets, if you will, are pretty standardized, with the exception of Tesla. Tesla has their own supercharger stations. They have their own, someone referred to it one day as a nozzle, just like a gasoline nozzle. They have their own. Teslas can charge at every other charging station with adapters, but currently you cannot charge any electric vehicle except a Tesla at a charging station, a Tesla charging station. Although Tesla says they are going to open up their charging stations to other electric vehicle owners at some point. And I guess it sort of makes sense, because that charging station, the picture on the left, there's 2, 4, 6, I don't know, about 20 places to charge up your electric car. And there's about 6 cars in there. And that's pretty much what I see whenever I see a Tesla charging station. They're never full. And that's maybe one of the reasons they want to make them available to other people. So there's, when you go out and buy a car, you get a window sticker. Might kind of look like that, or the picture there. And it tells you how many miles per gallon it's going to get. There's something called Mpge, which is sort of miles per gallon equivalent. It gives you a rough idea of what that vehicle range will be based on the consumption rate of the equivalent of kind of a gallon of gasoline. It's a pretty vague number. I'd rather just know what the real range is and just say, what's the driving range? How far can I go on a charge? And rather than Mpge, but again, it gives you an idea of what there is, but it's a comparison, I suppose. So, then we kind of, okay, we're stuck. There we go. So again, where do you plug in? There's all kinds of apps to do that. Kind of a map of the Northeast, you see a lot of charging stations. I live near Boston. Boston plans on adding a whole bunch of charging stations. You see a lot of them in municipal offices. When I charge an electric car, I have a app on my phone, ChargePoint, another app on my phone called EVgo. That to me gets me to about 85% of most of the charging stations. So if I'm running low on electricity, I can look for one of those, pull in. I have my credit card tied to my phone app, so I can charge up if it's a charging station that charges you money. Not all of them do. In fact, most of them don't. So one of the things you hear about from electric vehicle owners is, I'm running out of electricity. It's called range anxiety. What do I do? Well, I love this quote, and it's pretty true. Range anxiety is generally only a concern to people who don't drive electric. And we hear that quite a bit. We hear that from people quite a bit, that, I never worry about running out of electricity. I charge at home. I charge at home every night. It's not that big a deal. So how are we handling road service when it comes to electric vehicles? A couple different ways. Right now, if you have an electric vehicle and you do run out of electricity, we'll send a tow truck out to get you. There's a tow truck with a Tesla on the back of it. Maybe it ran out of electricity, maybe it was a mechanical problem. Also, we're looking at providing electric vehicle portable charging. We're going with a company called Blink, B-L-I-N-K. We just ordered 7 portable electric vehicle charging units. So we will be able to charge electric vehicles on the roadside. So we will give you the equivalent of, if you ran out of gas, we'll give you a gallon of gas. We'll give you the equivalent of a gallon of electricity, which will sit with you for 20 minutes, charge your vehicle up, and that should get you 20 or 25 miles based on the electric vehicle that you're driving. And we're doing this as a pilot, kind of all around our club area to see where it's going to work. Right now, we service about 250 electric vehicles a month out of tens of thousands of road service calls. So we're not doing a lot, and most of them are flat tires or people lock their keys in the car. Not so much, again, electric vehicles. I was at an electric vehicle conference about a month ago, and it was all electric vehicles owners. It was a big big event, and I asked if anyone ever ran out of electricity, and the person who put it on afterwards, I ended up having them on my radio show, and they said, "Oh, you're the one who asked that, because the question made me cringe." And I said, "Why is that?" And she said, "Well, I was afraid somebody's going to say they ran out of electricity, and it would kind of sour people's experiences." And I said, "No." And there was only one person who ran out of electricity, and they did it on purpose because they wanted to see what the real range of their electric car was. So again, most people charge up all the time. And some people will say to me, "Hey, I don't want to charge up an electric car. Why do I have to charge up my electric car?" And usually I'll say to them, "Well, what do you charge up now?" They'll say, "Well, my laptop computer, my iPad, my phone." And so what's one more thing to plug in? And especially if you live in an area, maybe you're lucky enough to have a garage or at least a driveway where you can make it pretty easy. Now, if you live in an apartment, there are some ability for apartment owners to actually put charging stations in and maybe have them paid for by municipalities or car companies or different things. But if you live in an apartment, a little bit more difficult. There is a company called, Spark, I think, and they're going to do electricity on demand. So basically, if you live in an apartment, you don't have any way to charge up, they will bring electricity to you, completely internal combustion free. It's basically a series of sort of I'll call them batteries, but they're not. And it can deliver a high-speed electric charge in about 20 minutes, and it'll give you about 80% of your range. And they're looking to try to put a model together for that. They were on Shark Tank, I don't know, a year ago, and Mark Cuban gave them $1 million to try to develop their product. So you can find out a lot of information. AAA has something called the Car Guide, which has a lot of information about gasoline in electric vehicles. And it's a free download, AAA.com/car guide. And on the national front, where are we seeing electric vehicles? I guess kind of where you would think. We see a lot of electric vehicles on the West Coast, a fair amount on the East Coast. Interesting statistic that I saw the other day, I actually wrote it down. There are more electric vehicles in Texas than there are in New York. There are 52,000 electric vehicles in Texas. There's about 32,500 in New York. Now, again, you look at population. The population overall in Texas is bigger than the population in New York. And percentage-wise, the percentage of electric vehicles per person, the numbers are pretty similar between the two. So, but it's interesting that Texas, of all places, where I never expected an electric vehicle to sell, there is 52,000 of them in Texas. So are you in the market for an EV? Is an electric vehicle hard to buy? No, not at all. In fact, right now, it's probably easier to buy a Ford Mustang Mach-E than it is to buy a Ford F-150 pickup truck, because the chip shortage that's affecting just about everything these days doesn't seem to be affecting electric vehicles quite as much. So what are the benefits? Well, you could get a tax credit. If you owe enough in taxes or have enough income, you can get up to a $7,500 tax credit. The tax credit is actually based on how big the battery is. So plug-in hybrids actually have some tax credits as well. They're clean and they're quiet. They don't require, I put no maintenance here. Not no maintenance, there is maintenance, but it's low as compared to a gasoline car. Depending on the car, it's zero emissions or low emissions. People will argue that electricity is made by generators that maybe are powered by coal. Not so much here in the East Coast. Most of our electric generation is natural gas or nuclear. In some cases, lower state registration fees. It's cheaper to register an electric car in some states, and of course, that federal tax credit. And it is a credit, it's not a rebate. Don't confuse the two. And in some cases, that credit can be applied to a lease. So you might be able to get that money off your lease as well. Some of the information, if you want to find out more about electric cars, the Department of Energy, AAA, of course, newsroom.aaa.com. The Car Guide, which is great, AAA.com/car guide. Green Energy Consumers is a group here in the Northeast, and they have some pretty interesting incentives from time to time. At one point last year, if you lived in Massachusetts, for instance, you could get almost 50% off the cost of a Chevrolet Bolt. You could buy a $40,000 Chevrolet Bolt for about $22,000. Pretty significant savings. And of course, the EPA has a lot of information as well. If you have questions of any kind about cars or electric vehicles or anything, the easiest way to find me is AAA.com/car doctor. And there's a section there. Send me an email or drop me a note there, and I will be happy to answer your question. I try to answer them all within 24 hours usually. Every question gets an answer one way or another. So that's pretty much my canned presentation about electric vehicles. Does anyone have a question I can answer?